Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the June 20th, 2024 Baltimore City Planning Commission meeting. My name is Sean Davis. I have the pleasure of chairing the commission. Sitting to my right is Chris Ryer, the Director of Planning and Secretary for the commission. Mr. Secretary, will you call roll?
Robin Allen.
Present.
Marcia Collins.
Present.
The Honorable Eric Costello is not present. Talib Horn will not be present today. Claudia Jolin.
Present.
Doug McCoach.
Present.
Justin Williams is not present yet. Eric Stevenson.
Present.
And Sean Davis.
Present. We have before us our meeting minutes from both May 20th, May 9th, 2024, and May 30th, 2024, although there really were no minutes for May 30th, 2024. Everybody have an opportunity to review those. Any questions or comments? If not, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stevenson. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have also the adoption of the Planning Commission schedule through June of 2025. Everybody have an opportunity to review that?
Yes.
Great. Anybody have any questions or comments? Does that take into account opening day for, okay, thank you very much. We always seem to schedule a hearing on opening day. Any other comments, questions? If not, do I have a motion?
Motion to adopt.
Vice Chair Stevenson, seconded by Commissioner McCoach. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Moving on to our consent agenda, we have CIP transfers for the Board of Estimates meeting on June 5th. There were 15 items. I know that Vice Chair Stevenson has a number of questions. I would ask Garrett Hallback from the Department of Public Works to come in and enlighten us on some of the CIP stuff. So, welcome. Thank you for being here. There was a holdover from our last meeting, CIP transfers, and then there are several questions that Vice Chair Stevenson has. So I'm just going to let Eric go and ask your questions.
I believe the holdover was item number 7 from last meeting. Could you remind us all what that was?
Unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me.
I can pull it out.
While we're waiting for that, you had a couple of questions regarding, I think it was items, I don't have that, but hold on.
7 and 8.
7 and 8.
And so these are transfers related to the consent decree compliance. I understand, as is summarized here on the agenda, that it's related to auditing requests and reclassifying of expenses, which seems innocuous enough, but I just wanted a little bit more context and also understanding around if this is money that has already been spent and is being reclassified, if it's money that was previously budgeted and is being reclassified, or just sort of specifically what's going on there?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Garrett Hallback. I'm the Chief of Financial Planning at DPW, so I'm in charge of the budgeting team for the agency.
God bless you.
The second part of your question is easier to answer. This is money that has already been spent. So this is more of a kind of an accounting and bookkeeping cleanup exercise at this point. So backing up just for a moment, I'll state for the record, I'm not an accountant. I do budgeting, so slightly different worlds, but I do work with the city accountants and the Department of Finance. And when the fiscal 23 books were closed, the practice is to have an outside auditing firm hired to look at the city's books and do some auditing practices, which includes making recommendations to the Department of Finance about how the city should conduct its business. One of the new recommendations that came out of the most recent cycle was to consider looking at the consent decree work as a project in and of itself. Given that it has a defined beginning and end date, it has a defined scope of work, it even has a project manager in DPW. So if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we should just call it, in this case, a capital project. So that is a change of practice in DPW. We had been recording a lot of those expenses on the operating budget for most of prior history, and just for the record, the modified consent decree has been ongoing since 2002. So it is a change. We do have 2 consent decrees now, so there's a transfer for each one of those, and that's to recognize the expenses that were incurred in fiscal '23, and that we're now going to book, basically per the auditor's recommendations, as capital projects going forward. So there will be more expenses in both of these going forward. For example, the sanitary sewer consent decree has an end date, I believe, of December 2030. So in the next CIP, DPW is going to have a line showing those anticipated consent decree costs for both of those going out until their expected end dates.
So it would be included in the CIP program itself.
Yes, yes.
Good.
And this would be in addition to all of the discrete capital projects that were themselves already part of the consent decree.
Good. Do you have any- because I have a question on that one. I mean, I think it's great that we're finally categorizing everything that's associated with the consent decree to a specific budget item so that we can understand, what it is actually costing the city to comply with those consent decrees versus when we started this process. Unfortunately, you said it goes back to 2020.
2002.
I'm sorry, 2002. Yeah, I had the numbers right, just in a different order.
Right, right.
But if it goes back to 2002, we've lost 22 years or 24 years now for the budget cycle. So 23, 24.
I don't want to say we've lost, but we have turned over the financial system twice since then, and so it does introduce some challenges in crosswalking data that's 20 years old to Workday where we are now.
Yeah,
So I do think this will increase transparency.
It's good. I mean, I think that's a very good practice to understand what we're spending to meet those consent decree objectives. Eric?
Great. So in future budgets, as we see that as sort of a combined capital project, will we still have any visibility into the individual projects that are sort of?
Yes, yes. So what this new practice is doing, it's capturing things that were going on the operating side of the budget. We're still going to have a number of like inflow and infiltration projects on the sewer system that you're going to see coming through BOE and the CIP.
Great. That's all for now, I think. Thank you.
Okay.
So, Doug, Commissioner McCoach.
Actually, it might be a question for Sarah if you wanted to ask her up.
I just wanted to know if Sarah was able to find the item from last.
I have a question. I don't think the CIP transfers doesn't have it, but I have the question that you asked, Commissioner.
Okay, sure.
You want me to read it out?
Yeah, could you?
Yep.
Sure.
So the question was, it looks like we budgeted $2.5 million in 2024 CIP, and now DPW is requesting $8 million more. Is this amount only for project management, or does it include infrastructure construction costs? Is it the case that these sewer infrastructure project costs that were previously going to be done by DPW are now being subcontracted out? The consent decree is of the utmost importance and something we absolutely should invest in. The concern is from a financial management standpoint. If I'm correct, DPW asked for $2.5 million last year and now wants a total of $10.5 million. And there's concern about that. Please clarify.
Sure. So the third transfer is for Amendment 2 to Project 1294, and that is the program management for the consent decree that DPW has been contracting with. And Commissioner Collins, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had a program management team contracted out by DPW for at least the past, I want to say 15 years, perhaps longer.
Yeah.
So
For the full,
for the length of the
period.
consent decree.
Yes.
So we've always had an engineering consulting firm assisting DPW, bringing in skills and expertise that we don't have in-house. So for example, right now we're pursuing Amendment 2 with a firm called AECOM. They're a very large engineering firm. They can pull in experts who do very particular things. What they're doing, so to your point about was this done in-house before, it has not. These are outside experts that we do rely on to guide us through how to best comply with the consent decree and make sure we're meeting it and we're getting it done as soon as possible. In this case, We are requesting a slight increase in funding. The base contract was originally, I'm going to use capital dollars only here to keep this simple. It was going to be $15 million over 3 years, so $5 million a year. And now we're doing a 2-year extension, I believe for $12 million. So it's $6 million a year instead of $5 million a year. And that does reflect both just increases in costs and also some increase in what we're asking the firm to do. There's more interest now, for example, in kind of hydraulic and flow monitoring to make sure that all the assets that we're building actually perform the way we expect due to changes in climate.
So I'm hearing that this is an increase in scope, and thank you very much. And so trying to understand the when of these allocations. So it sounded like there was a 3-year allocation and this money is for 2 additional years?
Yeah, there was a decision made last year that we wanted to pursue a 2-year extension to the contract instead of a 1-year. We wanted to stick with the firm, and it just made sense to do that all at once rather than doing another renewal. So I just want to stress, these are for services that DPW has been contracting for many years, and this is just ongoing.
So I guess my question is why this is outside of the regular capital process, and we're not just, if these are, future years, why? And then attached to that question, could you remind us where the funds are coming from?
I believe they're coming from a bundled sewer account. So it's the same bundled account that was funding the discrete consent decree projects. It's also funding, in this case, the program management for those projects. So in going forward, Sarah and Kristen are making agencies really request more discrete projects over time and showing how those are funded through the future. So as we use Workday more and more, I think there's going to be a lot more transparency in what agencies are requesting, and I think in the next CIP you'll see that. DPW, I think in particular, has a lot of old accounts with a large amount of appropriations from prior years. So I think it's consistent in the sense that we're still using it to support sewer projects related to the consent decree, but we'll make that much more transparent and specific going forward.
And in the upcoming CIP and future CIPs, all of the elements that are associated with the consent decree item, including professional services from outside firms and whatnot, will be included in the budget item. So we're looking at the kind of the full picture.
Yeah, we can show you what are the discrete capital projects and what is that program management piece.
Okay. So it's something that definitely, next year when we're looking at CIP, we just got to be very diligent about making sure that we got everything in there so that we're not transferring monies from other capital projects outside of the consent decree into the consent decree budget in as much as possible. I know things change and, prices go up and whatnot, so.
I think that's good for now. Thank you. Some helpful information there. I think I'll probably follow up with some additional questions.
Sure.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
So a couple things. First off, Doug,
It's a question for internally in the departments, and I think Sarah may help me. So when we sit up here every 2 or 3 weeks and we see the consent agenda, there's invariably going to be 3 or 4 items which are not consistent with the CIP. I'm trying to determine, as a panelist and a commission member, what to make of that comment. I presume that projects which have already been paid for and improve our city's infrastructure meet the larger goal of advancing our city. So when it says not consistent with CIP, does this have to do with accounting processes, or does this,
Yeah, I can.
what's that actually tell us
So
as a commission?
Historically, the city has had a process after the capital budget is approved, that the appropriations were put into reserve accounts rather than into active accounts. And so agencies had to transfer funds from the reserve accounts into active accounts before they could spend from them. And so if they were moving it from account A into, for project A into an active account for project A, then we marked it as consistent. And so when you're seeing things that say they're consistent, all they're doing is moving it from a reserve account to an active account. In the last couple of years, we have eliminated that step because it doesn't really add value. But agencies have older funds, older appropriations that are still in reserve accounts. And so that's why you're seeing those transfers still. In the next 6 months, we're hoping to eliminate all of the reserve accounts. We're hoping to consolidate all of the funds into active accounts, but we have to work through some other issues with the transition to Workday before we're able to do that. So you'll see a large action coming before you to move money from reserve accounts to active accounts for a lengthy list of projects all at once. So that's just a preview of things to come. But when it says it's not consistent, that means an agency is proposing to move funds from project A to project B. So it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean it's inconsistent with the values that we all hold, but it just means that it's not consistent with what was originally approved for project A, that we're moving it from project A to project B. So that's what that non-consistent means.
So is it, if these moves, these financial, reallocation are consistent, is it really something that can be considered a consent agenda item if we don't have enough information as planning commissioners to sort of validate the recommendation?
Yeah, going forward, all of the transfers that you see at some point will be not consistent. So we may want to think about whether they remain on the consent agenda. But we will be asking you to kind of look at them. You will see much fewer transfers, but they will be more meaningful. And so maybe we do want to move them off of consent. Because in the past, you were seeing large volumes of them, but they weren't particularly meaningful because they were just moving from reserve to active. And I think that's why it's historically been on consent. But you make a good point.
My only concern with moving it out of consent and into the regular agenda is, then it's going to be a public hearing for every one of those items, which may be fine, but I don't think it, we can still ask the same questions if the item's under a consent agenda item, as we are doing right now, and come to the same conclusion without opening every single one of those non-consistent CIP transfers up to a public hearing, because then we're going to get into a quagmire.
So it's something we can discuss as we move in that direction, and you'll also see a much smaller volume of them.
Yeah, good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Commissioner Collins.
I was just going to offer that if there were additional questions that the commissioners wanted to prepare and, send to us, we'd be happy to, look them over and then come back and respond to each, so.
Yeah, I think obviously as the accounting principles are changing and some of our CIP processes are changing and whatnot, I agree that we're going to have fewer of them, but they're probably going to be more meaningful because they're all going to become non-consistent. So, which is good. But all right, if there's no other questions from the commission, playing off the Workday ad, Garrett, you're a rock star. Does anybody get that? All right, anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, with that, we have the 15 items from the June 5th Board of Estimate meetings. With those explanations, do we have any additional questions or comments? If not, do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Vice Chair Stevenson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Next, we have City Council Bill 24-0475, release of a 20-foot right-of-way identified as parcel 3 as shown on plat, right-of-way 20-34176, and release of a 10-foot right-of-way identified as parcel 2 as shown on plat RW 20-34429. On behalf of the City Council President, are there any questions or comments regarding this consent agenda item? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Collins, second.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner McCoach. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Turning it over to our regular agenda, Mr. Secretary.
First item on the regular agenda, City Schools 2024 Comprehensive Educational Facilities Master Plan. Cindy Smith will present.
That doesn't look like Cindy Smith.
It doesn't look like so.
I am Alex Bennett. I'm a GIS analyst in facilities planning with City Schools. I am joined by Cindy Smith, our Executive Director of Facilities Planning, Design, and Construction, as well as my colleague Brian Slobotsky. If I'm unable to answer any questions you might have, they might be able to help me out. So,
Welcome.
thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
One moves as I try and get the slides.
So I'll be presenting this year's Comprehensive Educational Facilities Master Plan, which is a mouthful, so I'll refer to it as the CEFMP.
We've heard it every year for the last, for me, for 7 years, so.
Perfect. Do I have control of this?
If it's using the PDF, not a PowerPoint, we can try the clicker. If it doesn't work, I'll have to do it for you.
This is a really interesting
Beautiful.
Perfect report
All right.
about the demographic changes.
Thanks again. This supports priority number 3 of the Board of Commissioners.
In a way, that's.
This is a document the state requires us to produce every year. It's very wide-ranging. I'll just touch on a handful of the topics today. I'm sure members of this commission are familiar with these trends. Our population has been decreasing according to the census every year since 2015. After a period of relative stability, we've lost a lot of Black residents in particular. We have gained a significant number of Latino residents, which I'll return to in a minute. At the same time, we've seen birth counts decreasing. You'll see this trend actually started before 2015, and it's following a nationwide trend of decreasing birth rates. Obviously, that has direct implications for school enrollment. You can see in blue, our historical enrollment also began to decline in 2015. This year, we were a little under 76,000 students, and we project that to plateau out to around 70,000 in 10 years or so. Those losses have not been distributed evenly around the city. You'll see in the southeast, we've actually seen some gains. This map shows changes in the number of students living in each of these areas since 2015. But the overall losses in East and West Baltimore in particular have outweighed those gains. At the same time, we've seen a concurrent demographic shift in our enrollment. Since 2015, that same time period, Latino enrollment has increased by 100%. And our Latino students now comprise almost 20% of our total student body. Those students are mostly concentrated in the southeast with a few other pockets around the city. And I'll zoom into this black outlined area here. And this is to give you guys a sense of the kinds of things we're looking at in this year's CEFMP. So we've noticed in that area in the southeast, Southeast A, we're calling here the area from Patterson Park down to Canton. Southeast B is the far east edge of the city from Greektown down to Holabird. While we still have more students overall in Southeast A, it's been relatively flat. This graph is showing you since 2019, that pre-pandemic year. And where we're really seeing the gains now are in those other 3 elementary school zones in Southeast B. This year we saw over 700 more students living there than we did in 2019. Oh, my clicker failed me. Thank you. Enrollment plays an important role in facilities planning for us because that determines our utilization, which is simply the enrollment divided by the capacity of a school building, the number of seats that it can support. And utilization determines the kinds of capital projects the state will fund for us. Oh, I'm back. We've made a lot of progress on a district level with our utilization numbers over the last decade or so. We've surplus 2.7 million square feet, returned those facilities back to the city. See that reflected in the gold line here. That's the total number of seats we have as a district. As that's fallen in the purple, you see our district-wide utilization. That's been going up. 86% is where we like to be. This year, we were right at 87%, which is good. But as our surpluses are completed and we project our enrollment to continue to fall, our utilization will also continue to decline. This gives you an idea of our building footprint, how that breaks down between different grade bands. About 60% of our portfolio in terms of square footage is in our elementary and elementary middle buildings. And in fact, while we're at a good overall level for utilization, if you look at those grade bands, specifically our elementary and elementary middle buildings, we have a shortfall of about 5,000 seats, while we have excess capacity in our secondary school buildings. Again, that's not distributed evenly around the city. These are elementary school zones, utilization for the zoned school in each of those zones. You can see, for example, in that southeast area that we were looking at a minute ago, solidly red and orange, indicating it's at or over capacity, while we see more pockets of lower utilization in East and West Baltimore. Part of that is because we have a high out-of-zone rate, was 46% this year for our elementary school students. The biggest portion of those are students who are attending charters or other non-traditional schools. In other words, these are students who are attending schools other than their zoned school. But not all by any means, and this is much more pronounced at the middle and high school levels, where we have school choice and students can go anywhere around the city. As part of the CEFMP, we also try to assess recent housing developments, new units that have come online, things that are in the pipeline. We're now paying close attention to the urban design and architecture minutes for information about things in the works. We have a yield calculator that estimates yield of students from a new development that's based on historical data. It's important to keep in mind, though, that new units don't necessarily mean new students, so to speak. Could be folks relocating from within the city. We've also noticed that in a lot of the newer developments, large apartment buildings with 50 or more units in them, we don't tend to see a lot of our students living in those so far. We do certainly expect to see lots of students in the Perkins redevelopment, where the new City Springs building will be, the Keys Point project, which is in that southeast area I talked about before, as well as Westport. That one's a little trickier to predict just because the housing is much different than what's been there previously. Good news is we do have plenty of room at Westport. As I alluded to before, our utilization determines the types of capital projects the state will fund for us. Does not affect the overall amount of money that we have access to. We estimate we're running about a $365 million annual deficit compared to what it would actually take to upgrade and maintain all of our buildings to the standard we'd like to. This gives you a sense of the money that we do have to spend. Each year, highlighted in blue there is the state CIP and, of course, the city CIP. Those are our bedrocks that we rely on. The Healthy School Fund has been a big boon for us over the last few years. We hope to see that continue, but that's not intended to be a permanent program. The other ones listed there are still funding ongoing projects, but they're either one-time sources or programs that have been completed, like ESSER, the federal relief. Good news is we are making progress. We expect about half of our students to be in newer renovated buildings by 2030. Most recently, Cross Country Elementary Middle just opened back in January. And the data that we present here and in the CFMP, it's not just to inform capital project decisions. We use it throughout the year, for example, in our annual review process, where we present data, make recommendations to the school board. This map is just an example of the types of things that we looked at this past year when the board voted to merge Blifford Drew Jemison and Augusta Fells Savage. And finally, suggestion from this commission last year was that we highlight the ways school facilities benefit the community at large. We see a lot of community use of our schools. We issued over 1,000 permits over this last school year for educational, recreational, et cetera, activities. And of course, we house permanent spaces like rec centers and Head Starts. We have a particularly extensive relationship with Rexon Park, and we're excited to be including brand new rec center spaces in a couple of our ongoing projects. Pictured here is Furley Elementary. That area outlined in yellow will be a brand new rec center space that the community will have access to. And of course, we recognize that this is a two-way street. Our students also benefit from being part of a broader community. The main vehicle for that is the Community Schools program, where we try to provide wraparound services to support not just students academically, but their physical and mental health with some of our partner agencies. And we're pleased to report that as of this school year, all of our schools are now community schools, so they have a coordinator. And just to wrap up, this is really a process, living document. Of course, we publish something every year, but we're always trying to improve our analyses and data collection, and also the way we communicate our data, something I'm particularly interested in. One effort towards that last year that will continue this year is we put together a series of interactive maps and dashboards that you can find at that link, or if you scan that QR code, we'll take you to the page. This one shown here is an example. You can pick any school and see demographic breakdown. You can see different characteristics of the student body. And we've got ones up there for capital investments, for surplus history, lots of different topics. Yeah, hope folks check that out and get something out of it. And we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
That was without a doubt the quickest public schools presentation we've ever received.
Wow.
In 7 years. So.
My
with
target
that-
was 10 minutes.
I'm sorry?
My target was 10 minutes.
Well, I think you beat that.
Okay.
All right, so questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Collins.
I don't really have a question, but I appreciate the manner in which you're displaying this information. It's very direct. And I read through the document, and there is a lot of good information there. Obviously, as a body that looks at everyone's capital projects, surplus schools tend to be one of our concerns because they come back into our hands, and they tend to be the outdated buildings, and they're very difficult to get back into some use. And it's a challenge for us taking on those buildings. So I noticed that you said there were some additional surplus schools. Could you go back to that section and remind me what that was?
We have 3 more that have been approved by the board. Sorry, it's a little, takes a minute. Would note that the 3, yeah, you need to go back. Yeah, it's not.
Which one?
Keep going. One more, I think. Oh, no, keep going. One more. And one more. There you go. Yeah. The ones in orange there are planned. One thing to note about those, they're all currently being used as swing space
Right.
for ongoing projects. So the surplus dates for those are dependent on those projects being completed and students moving back into their home buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Jolin. Vice Chair Stevenson.
Thank you. Great presentation. I appreciate the efficiency. Also appreciate the QR code and all the really incredible data that you guys have available on that site. I encourage everyone to check that out.
Thank you.
You can really drill down and see some interesting things on a school-by-school basis, like you mentioned. All right, couple questions. First one is pretty specific about elementary zone 35, Harlem Park Elementary Middle. It sort of stands out on few of the different maps that you have. One is because it looks like there's high utilization in that area. It's also one of the areas that has a moderate to high out of area rate where students are leaving that neighborhood to go to school other places. And so I wonder, in that context, it seems like there's demand there, and I'm wondering what the corresponding investment to meet that demand might be.
So about the elementary school in particular? Down there?
Yeah, sort of to ask in another way, I mean, that's what I'm seeing from this data that you presented. You know, right there, it's kind of a rectangle below the orange and above some more red. So, you know, we have a utilization rate there that I think that means over 100%. So what do we do with that data? What's then the response to that?
So I'm gonna make sure I'm clear. It's this rectangle right here, right?
Yes.
I think that would be right. You want to speak to that
Yeah, well,
specifically?
Hi, I'm Cindy Smith. So we do have an annual portfolio review committee that looks at all of these kinds of zones, these issues where we're utilized, where we're underutilized, to try to make recommendations annually to our board and to our CEO as far as what we need to do for those kinds of things. In this particular one, Harlem Park, we're actually moving a wing of them into the Harlem Park Middle Building, which now houses Augusta Fells Savage with the merged BDJ. They're gonna take over a wing of that building actually to help handle their overutilization at this point. They are, it's an attached building, so that can address that very easily.
Okay. Great, thank you. My next question is, I really appreciated the slide about the collaboration between rec and parks and city schools and how important that is for a lot of our communities where the recs and schools share a building. Harlem Park Elementary Middle being one that shares with the rec center. This question is about Lillian Jones and Gilmore Elementary. So Gilmore was, of course, recently surplused as a sort of side effect. The attached rec ended up being closed. And there's currently plans from Rec and Parks to invest in a new rec center at Lillian Jones. So my question is if there's any corresponding investment plan from schools to recreate that or sort of leverage the investment that Rec and Parks is making so we can recreate that dichotomy.
There are no plans from city schools to go back into Gilmore or to use that for a school. So sharing that use would be difficult since we don't plan to go back into Gilmore.
In terms of the community sort of at large, regardless of the building?
Constantly looking with Rec and Parks at where we can partner on different projects, different partnerships, different uses of spaces, things like that. So that is definitely not out of the question.
Okay. That's all I had specific to the presentation. I've got an adjacent question though, since we're in the Sandtown Winchester neighborhood. So when Gilmore was closed, it was combined with Sway. It went from an elementary and middle to an elementary middle. I don't know how else to say this, except there's talks in the community about Sway and the charter school, New Song, that's also in Sandtown. Do you have any idea what's going on with that?
We had not heard those rumors until they were flagged for us earlier this week. The board hasn't approved any changes in any management, any merger, anything like that. We are not aware of any recommendation or any request in that regard.
Great.
As of this week.
As of this week.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you very much.
Councilman Costello, any questions?
Nope.
Commissioner McCoach?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Allen?
Well, first, thank you for the presentation. As I told Ms. Smith privately before the meeting started, I'm very impressed with the PowerPoint, and thank you for presenting it as you did. I always have to say, I am aware how much work goes into not just compiling the presentation, but just the work you do year-round, all the time. Most people do not know. It's a lot, and so I appreciate it. I did have one question. I noticed that the amount from the state, the most recent CIP, was 26 million. That seems so low if I recall past years.
It is.
Have they changed the formula?
The formula hasn't changed. It is much lower than it has been for the last couple years. And last year, I can say that the state did add money at the very last minute into the state capital budget, which allowed our allocation to increase. So we got more than usual last year. This year, it's back down to, it's just what the state budget was and our portion of that. Unfortunately, the amount that we received this year was only enough to keep our 4 major capital projects going. So the Furley Marie Fairing, Armistead Gardens, and what am I forgetting?
Northeast.
Thank you, Northeast going. And that is the only funds that we received from the state this year.
Yeah, we
What-
submitted over 70 projects, and
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
that's all that we got approved.
And what is the percentage that the state,
Our cost share
Yeah,
is
thank you.
97% right now.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner? You good? So a couple things. So how does the Kerwin Commission play into this? Does it have anything to do with capital, or is that just on the operations side?
For the most part, right now, it's really on the operations side. We have not gotten into the point of trying to implement any additional like pre-K3 seats. We do have citywide programs providing services to pre-K3, pre-K4, providing a lot of those services already. So there's a lot more right now, Kerwin, for operational side and academic side than there are for the portfolio and the building side.
Okay. So the increase in elementary school population in the southwest, southeast district. I mean, eventually those elementary school kids become middle school kids, then become high school kids. And are we taking that into consideration when we're going through our closure programs to make sure that when that bubble moves into the middle school, we have facilities for them? Obviously, when they get to the high school, they have choice, but again, eventually that bubble is going to work its way through the hose and get up to the middle schools and high schools. And
There's choice within your zone for middle and choice within the city for high. But this is one of the many topics that our portfolio review committee is looking at right now, actually, is those bubbles, in particular this bubble.
yeah, because I mean, it would be, I understand the surplus school, program and problem that we've been having. I just don't want to be 10 years from now when all those kids are moving from elementary, or not 10 years, as that population continues to grow and those schools continue to flourish, when they move into the middle schools, we need to have the facilities for them at the middle school level too.
That is correct. And, I think most of these actually in this area are pre-K to 8s as it is. So it's making sure that we actually have the seats across those pre-K to 8s too, not just this, because we only have 4 at this point standalone middle schools in the district. But this is a big topic for us because this is a different area. We were looking in a different zone just 5 years ago for where this growth was and has shifted. So this is a big topic in our discussions right now.
And I think if my math's correct, there's, forgive the pun, there's like 126 public schools in the city. Is that right? If I added up everything on that pie chart that you had, I think it was 126.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, and then how many additional, like charter schools are there in the city, or, non-public schools? Do you have any idea?
35 charter.
Sounds right, yes. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head either.
So are those in addition to the
It's roughly
126?
140 total schools, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, good.
Yeah, that's,
145,
140 total facilities.
yeah, 164 schools,
Right.
yeah.
yeah, the
Because
charter
some of the
schools-
schools are combined elementary,
Yes,
middle.
yeah.
Okay, all right, good.
Or there's instances like Renaissance Academy and,
Booker T.
which is a high school, and Booker T. Washington Middle School for the Arts are in the same
Facility.
building. Yeah.
Yes, Augusta Fells with Career Academy,
Okay.
Bard and Connections, there's multiple of those situations,
Also, in Baltimore, charter schools are public schools.
yes.
Yes. I
Yeah,
read
which
that.
is why your questions threw me off, or threw us off, but yes.
Forgive me, my
It's
layman's,
confusing.
layman's terminology, but I think of, obviously a charter school is public school, but it's,
Most places they are not, so.
but now you're even confusing me even
understand
more,
what
so I'll
But-
just stop
but
that
ours
line
also-
of questioning entirely.
Ours also vary between zone charter and non-zone charter, so there's all kinds of
crazy.
layers to that.
Also important to note, Mr. Chair and colleagues, that charter schools are funded differently than the non-charter schools.
Yes,
And there's a whole very long history behind that.
yes. I guess my final comment or question is, as Commissioner Collins pointed out, when schools identify as in surplus as a school, it comes off your balance sheet, but it comes back to the city's balance sheet. And the city, who we don't have enough money for our existing capital needs, I think it would be really beneficial is when you surplus a school, there has to be some level of mothballing of the school to shore it up before it's brought back to the other side of the ledger. Because, and in my opinion, those costs should be borne by the school. To make sure that, okay, we're